So glad you could come along once again. We are joined as always by Greg Engert, beer director for the Neighborhood Restaurant Group, which includes such places as the Evening Star Cafe in the Del Rey neighborhood, Planet Wine right next door. You should stop in there if you can. What's on tap this week?
Well, on tap this week actually is a beer that we actually have in stock at Planet Wine right now, so that's pretty cool. Who knew? That wasn't planned.
I'm omnipresent.
It's that time of year again. You know, last week we did the inimitable Southern Tier Pumpkin for our pumpkin ale. This week we turn our attention to the ever ubiquitous seasonal of late summer and early fall, and that's the Oktoberfest style. And this one's a fantastic version of that. This is a beer that comes to us from Austria. It's the Hofstetten Brewery, and the beer is called Hochzeitsbier von 1810 or 1810, and this is their rendition of an Oktoberfest. And this, like the Southern Tier Pumpkin that we talked about last week, will be on tap at the big Snallygaster Festival, which we all know what Snallygaster is now, I think.
Yes, and then I'm frightened to go anywhere near the Anacostia late at night, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. This creature will come out and get you. 2 weeks away, we have this giant beer fest down by Yards Park in D.C. 125 beers at last count. Lots of great seasonal stuff, but then just some great, awesome beers as well, just because they taste great. So you can see that down there, and we're actually going to have this on tap, but we're also going to have it in a wood-clad gravity keg. So that's going to be an exciting way to taste this. Now, why is it called Hochzeitsbier von 1810 if it's an Oktoberfest beer? Well, because Oktoberfest, as we know it today, traces its roots back to the party thrown after the wedding or Hochzeit, high time, the celebration of Prince Ludwig and Princess Teresa in Bavaria in 1810. So they decided to throw this kind of festival for the citizens of Munich after the wedding, and they did so for the first time in 1810. And so the beer that they drank, actually, I don't believe they drank beer at the first festival. It was actually more about the horse races that were going on there and the gambling. But I think about 2 years later, beer became a hallmark of the festival, and obviously it is today. And so this beer is trying to go back to what the Oktoberfest style tasted more like back in those days than maybe, say, some that do today. Because today, many Oktoberfest beers in Germany, the Märzen Oktoberfest style, have gotten a little bit lighter. Yeah. They've gotten cleaner and crisper, more kind of Helles lagery rather than
your Augustiner.
Yeah. They're maybe not as malty as the American craft brewers. When they started making Oktoberfest beers, they started making them a little bit more traditionally with more of the Vienna malt and some Munich malt as well, which gives the kind of toasty quality that we associate, more malt character to these beers, brewing them a little bit stronger than the Germans had come to brew them. And then yet, what they're doing here is brewing one that's really richly malted and actually a little bit hoppy as well, to say that that's probably more what the beer would have tasted like back then. In actuality, it tasted nothing like any of these beers, because what Oktoberfest or Märzen is really originally was just leftover beer that nobody really wanted to drink. So in the old days...
But it was better than nothing.
It was better than nothing. So to follow me here, in the old days, refrigeration, of course, is an invention of the late 19th century. Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about purity laws like Reinheitsgebot and restrictions placed on brewing by feudal lords and others to make sure that the beer tasted great, so that the beer sold, so it could be taxed for the coffers of the lords and things like that. Well, the thing is that up until the 19th century, late 19th century, without refrigeration, brewing in hotter months, like summertime, could cause your beer to get really sour and really funky really fast, and didn't sell as well. So they started restricting when you could brew, largely because after you boil beer, you can't ferment it right away. You need to have the heat come down. So nowadays we use heat exchangers. That's another thing that happened to be invented in the 19th century. So back in the old days, every brewery, not just the Belgians, but the Germans, the English, everybody used what we call a cool ship. So after you boil your beer, you pump it up to the top level of the brewery where it sits in shallow pans overnight because you're brewing all day. Overnight, it's cooler. the beer becomes less hot, and then the next day you bring it down and you ferment it. That's what everybody is now. The lambic producers in Belgium today still use this because they like the wild yeast and bacteria that will get in there and over a series of years get the beer to get funky and palatably acidic and things like that. In the old days, everybody had to use a coolship just to exchange the heat. So they'd bring it down and ferment it and drink it so they wouldn't have to worry as much about the sour or the funky qualities. Now, if you try to use a coolship in August, as we all know in this area, it's so hot that negative bacteria are going to go wild and the beer is going to be undrinkable. So that's why you saw restrictions on when you could brew. So many places said, okay, you can brew from like mid-September until mid-March, for instance. That way you don't have to worry about bad infections. But we still need to drink beer throughout the summer because beer has been, for most of civilization's history, in grain-growing countries, the way you get hydrated. It's cleaner and safer than drinking water. So you needed to have it in the summer. So what they did was all cultures. The Belgians did this, they called it Saison. The French did it, they called it Bière de Garde. You brew beer in March that you then, in oak casks, store in underground caves that have been packed in with river ice from the preceding winter. And then throughout the summer, you just go into your stock and bring the beer out. Now, even though it's packed in ice and it's in underground caves, over a series of months, it's going to start to turn and not be that great. So if you're brewing it in March, well, in German, March is März. So Märzen is what they would be called. And then that's what it was known as, Märzen. And so you brew in March, you drink it throughout. Now, when you get to the fall and you can start brewing fresh beer again, you want to drink that and not this now stale and sour and kind of unpalatable beer. So imagine there's lots of harvest parties and things like that. So if you want to get rid of beer that you have, because inevitably you make more than you think you're going to need just in case, right? So if you have a bunch of that now soured kind of old beer left over, it makes sense to kind of dump it out at festivals and things like that. So I'm pretty sure that the original Märzens that would have been consumed in September or October during these festivals would have been the kind of the old stuff that people had to get rid of so that they could drink the better stuff again, the fresher things again. So truthfully, I think back then, the Märzen Oktoberfest probably would have been dark, smoky, and probably pretty sour by the time you got to it. Luckily, this beer is not any of those things. And as you taste it, you know, the hallmark, the melanoidin is the factor that comes through from Vienna Munich malts to give us this kind of beautiful toasted, biscuity, bready quality. You get that in the nose right off the rip. The palate is very complexly bready, but then the beautiful thing here is it does finish dry and has a nice hit of like herbal hop bitterness in the finish, which is really cool, really refreshing. So even though it's got a little bit more meat on its bones, a little bit stronger, it still finishes with a really great kind of tight bitterness that keeps it refreshing and keeps you wanting more.
Now, like last week, the pumpkin last week, this has a fantastic color.
Yeah, it is. It's got this beautiful kind of burnished, almost bronze-like glow to it. It's beautiful.
Now, I'm guessing for craft brewers that the most important thing when they try it is the taste. But how much stock do they put in how visually appealing it is?
A lot, actually, okay. Because one of the funny things about it is that you never want your beer to be super, super cloudy. And that's for appearance, obviously, because it just looks milky. It doesn't look appealing. And we do eat and drink with our minds and our eyes, you know. So you want the appeal factor. But also, you know, the more residual yeast and protein that may be left in a beer can dry the beer out. Oftentimes, if you drink, if you have like a bottle conditioned beer that has a lot of yeast sediment at the bottom, and you drink that portion, you'll notice how much drier it is because the yeast itself dries it out. So it can affect the flavor a little bit, which you might not want, but some people like. But also, the more stuff that's left in a beer is the more stuff that could possibly be consumed by bad bacteria later on, were the beer to be mishandled or something like that. Now, that's not to say that everybody filters the beer. They don't want to. But through, even in the beginnings, when you mash in your grains and you lauter and sparge through to the kettle, you're leaving lots of residual particulate matter behind. And so that the filtration kind of naturally begins then, continues on with possibly like with a whirlpool or something like that. And then the bright tanks, conditioning tanks, lagering tanks that many beers spend time in after fermentation are called bright tanks because that's an opportunity for the beer to drop somewhat bright. You can see here, this isn't crystal clear, so it hasn't been filtered. It's an unfiltered beer, But during its maturation time in those tanks, a lot of the particulate matter settled, and so when you racked it off to the kegs or the bottling line, you would leave a lot of that behind. So you're not removing flavor so much as you are making sure that it has a nice appearance, it has less matter that could maybe cause problems later on, and you're not going to affect the dryness on your palate as much.
My totally uneducated comment is it's the perfect murky.
That's right.
Which is not much.
It is. It's got it's a little hazy, but not too crazy.
What would you pair this with? I'm guessing that it's pretty versatile.
Totally versatile.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's the thing I'd say is, I was remarking before about the most popular styles in America are also the worst with food, which is kind of unfortunate irony. And honestly, when you're talking about great food beers, you're thinking about, like you said before, maltier beers that have great sweetness to them, beers that have fruity and spicy aromatics from fermentation, things like that, like Belgian ales typically are great, Bavarian Hefeweizens. And so the other thing that's great is to have something that's not too high in alcohol, so it won't overwhelm your palate or the food, and has a nice crispness to it. So really, some of these amber or Vienna lagers, Märzen, Oktoberfest, even Dunkel lagers that are slightly dark in color, are awesome with food because they bring so many of the flavors we find in our food. For instance, when you sear something, anything, you're going to caramelize the exterior, right? When you braise, that involves the sear as well. So you get this cool caramelization going. That's, in a way, what's happening with the grains that are malted to make these beers. So you get this kind of biscuity, bready sweetness, a little bit of a nuttiness, almost a raisiny quality, but also a hint of kind of toasted or caramelization. So it's going to go great with those flavors that you're going to find anywhere. And the cool thing is, since it's lighter on the palate, it can go with more delicate dishes. I think this would be awesome with salmon, actually, which is a meatier fish, but would be great there. But then it can also stand up to a steak.
When you said seared, flank steak.
Yeah, flank steak. Yeah, exactly. Flank steak. It could go great with that, as well. And the bready nuances make it ideal for just about anything, actually.
All right. History of beer. How beer is made. Why is it this color? Ask Greg. If you've got a question for Greg, please email us. It's beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, we appreciate it as always.
A pleasure.
Folks, please always do drink responsibly and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.